Dog runs desperately through Paris. What the police discovered, there was spine-chilling. The morning air crackled with tension at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Sarah Collins watched Max's ears perk up, his muscular frame suddenly rigid with attention. Something was wrong. 5 years of partnership had taught her to trust these subtle signals more than any sophisticated security system. "Max, what is it, boy?" she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to the radio on her shoulder. The Belgian Malinois' amber eyes remained fixed on a point in the distance, his nostrils flaring rhythmically. Around them, the bustling Terminal B continued its morning routine, passengers rushing to gates, baggage handlers maneuvering carts, and the constant hum of announcements echoing through the vast space. Sarah scanned the crowd, her trained eyes searching for anything unusual. Their morning had started typically enough with a routine patrol, a perfect opportunity to demonstrate K9 procedures to a new recruit. Now, that training exercise was quickly transforming into something else entirely. Max's low growl vibrated through his leash, a sound Sarah had heard only twice before in their partnership. Both times had led to major arrests. But this was different. There was an urgency in his posture she'd never seen before. "Dispatch, this is Officer Collins with K9 Unit 7. Sarah spoke into her radio, keeping her voice steady. "Possible situation at Terminal B, North Concourse. Max has indicated..." Her words cut off as Max suddenly lunged forward, pulling against his harness with unprecedented force. "Max, hold!" The command that had never failed before seemed to bounce off him. Sarah watched in disbelief as her perfectly trained partner broke formation, weaving through the startled crowd with determined precision. "K9 Unit 7, please repeat." The dispatcher's voice crackled through her radio, but Sarah was already running, trying to keep sight of Max's black and tan coat as he disappeared around a corner. The chase led them through service corridors and past restricted areas. Max moving with a purpose that defied his training, but spoke to something deeper. Sarah's mind raced through scenarios, a hidden explosive, a smuggled substance, a concealed threat. But nothing explained why her methodical, disciplined partner would suddenly abandon years of training. They burst through an emergency exit into the employee parking structure. The morning sun cast long shadows between the vehicles, and for a moment, Sarah lost sight of Max. Her heart pounded against her chest, not from the exertion, but from a creeping fear she'd never experienced in their partnership. "Max!" Her voice echoed through the concrete structure. For the first time since they'd been paired at the academy, her call went unanswered. The radio at her shoulder crackled to life. "Officer Collins, be advised. Additional units are en route to your location." "What's your status?" Sarah stared at the empty parking structure, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. How could she explain that her highly trained K9 partner, the dog who had never disobeyed a command, had just vanished without a trace? "Officer Collins, do you copy?" Her hand moved to her radio, but the words stuck in her throat. In the distance, a door slammed, followed by the screech of tires on asphalt. Sarah sprinted toward the sound, weapon drawn, but she was too late. Through the chain-link fence, she caught a glimpse of a dark van speeding away, and something that made her blood run cold. On the ground where the van had been parked lay Max's tactical collar, the metal police badge still gleaming in the morning sun. Sarah picked up the collar, her fingers running over the familiar worn edges. The weight of it in her hands felt wrong, unnatural. Max never went anywhere without his collar. It was as much a part of him as his badge was part of her. "This is Officer Collins," she finally responded, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "We have a situation. My partner, Max, is gone." As backup units began arriving, their sirens piercing the morning calm, Sarah stood motionless, clutching the empty collar. Something larger was unfolding, something that had compelled Max to break every rule of his training. And whatever it was, she knew with crushing certainty that she had just witnessed the beginning of the most challenging case of their career. If she ever saw her partner again, The morning sun continued to rise over Atlanta's skyline, indifferent to the fact that one of the city's finest K-9 officers had vanished, leaving behind only a collar and a mystery that would shake the department to its core. For Sarah, one question burned through all others. What had Max sensed that was important enough to make him abandon everything he knew? The answer, she feared, would prove far more terrifying than the question itself. Max's paws hit the wet pavement with calculated precision as he weaved through Atlanta's shadowy alleyways. The strange chemical scent that had first caught his attention at the airport still burned in his nostrils, growing stronger with each turn. Behind him, the sounds of the city grew distant. Sirens, helicopter rotors, and Sarah's voice calling his name through the radios of passing patrol cars. The guilt of leaving her behind clawed at his chest, fighting against the urgent instinct that drove him forward. In 5 years of service, he had never ignored her commands. Every fiber of his training screamed at him to return, to sit, to stay. But the scent, this wrongness in the air, pulled him onward with an urgency he couldn't ignore. Across town, Sarah stood in the airport's security center, surrounded by screens showing footage from every camera in the terminal. Her fingers drummed against Max's tactical collar as she watched the footage for the third time. "There," she pointed, freezing the frame. "See how he reacts before approaching the crowd. That's his detection posture." The security technician leaned closer, but Sarah knew he couldn't see what she saw. The subtle shift in Max's stance, the way his ears had locked forward moments before everything went wrong. "With all due respect, Officer Collins," Lieutenant Davidson's voice cut through her concentration. "Dogs can be compromised, even the best ones." Sarah turned to face her superior, barely containing her frustration. "Not Max, not like this." She rewound the footage again, this time focusing on the crowd. "Look at his movement pattern. He's not running away, he's pursuing something." Davidson sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Sarah, I know how much that dog means to you, but right now we have to consider all possibilities, including that he might have been turned." The suggestion hit Sarah like a physical blow. Turned? Max would never... "Officer Collins!" A young patrol officer burst into the room, slightly out of breath. "We've got another sighting." Traffic cameras picked him up near the West Side Industrial District. Sarah was moving before he finished speaking, but Davidson's hand caught her arm. "You're too close to this, Collins. I'm assigning Johnson and Martinez to follow up." "Sir, with respect, no one knows Max like I do. If he's trying to tell us something, that's exactly my point." Davidson's voice softened slightly. "Take the rest of the day. That's an order." Sarah walked out of the security center, her grip tightening on Max's collar. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Danny Chen, a fellow K-9 officer she'd trained with at the academy. "Check your email. You need to see this." The attached security footage showed Max moving through an industrial area, but something about his behavior made Sarah's breath catch. He wasn't running randomly. He was marking specific locations using the exact pattern they'd developed for building searches during training. Sarah's mind raced back to their training days. Max had always been different, showing an intelligence that went beyond standard K-9 capabilities. They'd developed their own system of signals, small variations in standard protocols that made their communication unique. And now he was using those same signals, leaving a trail only she would recognize. Her decision was made before she even started the car. Orders or not, she wouldn't abandon her partner. Max wasn't running away. He was trying to show them something big enough to risk everything they'd built together. The industrial district was quiet when Sarah arrived, the afternoon sun casting long shadows between abandoned warehouses. She followed Max's trail, reading his marks like breadcrumbs. Each location he'd marked matched their training pattern for high-risk substances. Near an old chemical storage facility, she found something that made her blood run cold. Scratched into the dirt was a pattern she and Max had practiced hundreds of times, their signal for an imminent threat. Sarah reached for her phone, then hesitated. If she called this in, the department would shut her out completely. But what she'd found suggested something far worse than a missing K9 officer. Max hadn't gone rogue. He was working his biggest case yet, and he needed her to understand why. As the sun began to set over Atlanta's skyline, Sarah made a choice that would either save her partner or end her career. She pulled out her personal notebook and began mapping Max's markers, determined to decode the message he was trying so desperately to convey. Somewhere in the city, her partner was risking everything to expose a threat only he had detected. She owed him the same courage in return. The distant sound of police sirens reminded her that time was running out. Soon, the department would realize she disobeyed orders. But as she studied the pattern of Max's movements, one thing became crystal clear. This was bigger than both of them, and Max had known it from the start. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Sarah's apartment as she spread her investigation notes across the kitchen table. Her eyes kept drifting to the framed photo on the wall. Her and Max at their K9 unit graduation, both looking impossibly young. The memory of that day flooded back, as vivid as if it were yesterday, 3 years earlier. "Collins, you're going to wash out if you keep this up." Sergeant Martinez's voice echoed across the training yard. Sarah stood rigid, trying to hide her frustration as yet another K9 prospect refused to engage with her. It was her 4th failed pairing attempt, a record at the Atlanta Police Department's K9 training facility. "Maybe you're just not cut out for K9, whispered a fellow recruit, loud enough for others to hear. Sarah ignored them, but the words stung. She'd fought too hard to get here, pushing through the doubts that had followed her since the warehouse incident, the one that had left her with a commendation for bravery and nightmares that still woke her in cold sweats. Later that evening, as Sarah stayed behind to review training protocols for the 100th time, she heard commotion from the kennel area. Following the sound, she found Martinez arguing with a military handler. "He's too intense," the handler was saying. "Washed out of 3 military training programs. Great nose, but he doesn't follow standard protocols. Can't place a dog like that." Sarah peered past them to see a Belgian Malinois sitting perfectly still in his kennel, amber eyes tracking every movement with unnerving intelligence. Unlike the other dogs that barked and paced, this one watched with an almost human awareness. "What's his name?" Sarah found herself asking. Martinez turned, surprised to find her there. "Max. And he's not a candidate for our program." Too many red flags, but Sarah couldn't look away from those eyes. Max held her gaze with an intensity that felt familiar, the same intensity she'd been criticized for throughout her career. She recognized something in him, the frustration of being misunderstood, of having instincts that didn't fit the standard playbook. "Let me try," she heard herself say. Martinez laughed. "Collins, you've failed with our best prospects. This one's already washed out of military training. Please." Something in her voice made Martinez pause. "Just give me 5 minutes." What happened next became legend at the training facility. The moment Max's kennel door opened, he walked directly to Sarah and sat, ignoring all standard introduction protocols. When she knelt to his level, he placed one paw on her knee, a gesture he'd never shown to any other handler. "He's choosing you," the military handler said, bewildered. "In 15 years, I've never seen anything like it." Their first training session revealed why Max had failed in other programs. He didn't just follow commands, he anticipated them. He developed his own variations on standard procedures, often improving them. Other handlers saw it as unpredictable behavior. Sarah saw it as brilliance. Late one night, after everyone else had left, Sarah found herself talking to Max about the warehouse incident, the hostage situation that had gone wrong, the split-second decision she'd made that saved 3 lives but broke every procedure in the book. Max listened with those intelligent eyes, and when she finished, he pressed his head against her hand. In that moment, a partnership was born. They graduated top of their class 6 months later, but not before developing a communication system all their own. Small gestures, subtle variations in standard commands, a language that only they shared. Martinez called it unorthodox. Sarah called it Trust. Present day. Sarah's phone buzzed, snapping her back to the present. A new security camera image showed Max moving with purpose through the city's south side. To anyone else, his behavior would seem erratic, but Sarah saw the pattern. He was using their private signals, marking locations just as they'd practiced countless times. She pulled up the map she'd been creating, adding the new location. The pattern was becoming clearer. Max wasn't just tracking suspects, he was piecing together a puzzle. Each marked location connected to businesses dealing with industrial chemicals. A sudden realization hit her. The warehouse incident that had haunted her, it had involved chemical weapons. Max wasn't just following his nose, he was following a trail that connected to her past. Somehow, he had put together pieces of a puzzle that even she hadn't seen. Sarah reached for her phone, then stopped. There was one person who might understand, Martinez, now retired but still respected in the department. He'd seen the beginning of their partnership, seen how their unconventional methods led to the highest success rate in the unit's history. As she dialed his number, Sarah looked again at the graduation photo. "Hold on, Max," she whispered. "I'm starting to understand what you're trying to tell me." The sun was setting over Atlanta, casting long shadows across her investigation notes. Somewhere out there, Max was following a trail that led to something bigger than both of them. And just like in their training days, he was counting on her to trust his instincts, even when they broke every rule in the book. The old case files felt heavy in Sarah's hands as she sat in Martinez's dimly lit living room. Her former sergeant's face grew increasingly grave as she laid out her theory about Max's behavior and its connection to the warehouse incident. "You're telling me your dog is tracking the same chemical signature from 3 years ago?" Martinez leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "That's impossible, Collins. Those guys were caught. Case closed." "Was it?" Sarah spread out her map, showing Max's movement pattern. "Look at these locations. Every single one connects to companies that deal with specialized chemical compounds, the same types we found in that warehouse." Martinez studied the pattern, his law enforcement instincts warring with disbelief. "Even if you're right, why would Max break protocol now, after all this time?" Sarah's phone buzzed, another alert from her makeshift tracking system. "Because something's changed. The chemical signature must be different this time, something that can fool standard detection methods, but not Max's enhanced sensitivity." Before Martinez could respond, Sarah's burner phone rang, Danny Chen's number. She put it on speaker. "Sarah, they've issued a department-wide order to treat Max as compromised." Danny's voice was tight with urgency. "They're authorized to use force if necessary." Sarah's blood ran cold. Who authorized that? Deputy Chief Rogers himself. "Sarah, there's something else. I did some digging into those companies on your map. 3 of them received special permits for chemical storage last month, signed by Rogers personally." Martinez sat up straighter, decades of investigative experience clicking into place. "Rogers? He wasn't even in narcotics during the warehouse case. Why would he?" He stopped, face darkening with realization. Sarah was already pulling up old case photos on her laptop. "Because he was in charge of equipment procurement, including all K9 unit supplies and training materials." She zoomed in on a grainy photo from the warehouse raid. "Look at the shipping labels on these barrels." Martinez leaned in, squinting. "Same company that just got those special permits." Max didn't go rogue. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. He recognized something no one else could, a scent he was never supposed to detect. "They've been developing something new, something that could bypass all standard K9 detection methods. And testing it right under our noses," Martinez finished, "using the K9 unit's own training facilities to perfect it." Sarah's phone lit up with another security camera alert. This time, the image made her gasp. Max was outside the Atlanta Convention Center, where the International Security Technology Summit was scheduled to begin tomorrow. The biggest gathering of law enforcement and security personnel in the Southeast. "Jesus," Martinez breathed. "It's not just about smuggling chemicals. They're planning to showcase their product, a way to make any contraband invisible to K9 units." And Max is the only one who can detect it, Sarah realized. That's why they need him gone. He's not just a liability, he's proof their system isn't perfect. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sound of sirens. Sarah thought about every training session, every time Max had shown abilities beyond standard K9 capabilities. They hadn't just been lucky. They'd accidentally created the very thing these conspirators feared most, a dog who could see through their perfect crime. Martinez stood up, his decision made. You'll need backup. Let me make some calls. People I trust from the old days. But Sarah was already heading for the door, checking her weapon. No time. The summit starts at 9 tomorrow morning. Whatever they're planning. Collins! Martinez's voice stopped her. You go in alone. You're not just risking your career. This goes all the way to the top. They won't hesitate to... He's my partner. Sarah cut him off, her voice steel. And right now, he's out there alone, trying to stop something bigger than both of us. I won't let him down. As she drove toward the convention center, Sarah's mind raced. Somewhere in the city, Max was laying a trail that led straight to the heart of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. Her partner had chosen to risk everything to expose the truth. Now, it was her turn to do the same. The Atlanta skyline glittered in the distance, a maze of lights and shadows where her partner was fighting a lonely battle. Sarah touched the empty collar on her passenger seat. I'm coming, Max. Just hold on a little longer. Behind her, Martinez was already making calls, setting in motion a chain of events that would either expose the biggest corruption scandal in Atlanta's history or seal the fate of a K9 officer who dared to see what no one else could. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded the Atlanta Convention Center in shadows as Sarah crouched behind a maintenance truck, watching security patrols pass. Her heart thundered in her chest, not from fear, but from anticipation. Max's latest marking had led her here, to the loading docks, where crews were bringing in equipment for the summit. A familiar bark echoed from somewhere inside the building. Sarah's breath caught. After 3 days, hearing Max's voice sent a surge of emotion through her. He was alive, he was here, and he was still fighting. All units be advised, her radio crackled with Lieutenant Davidson's voice. Suspect K9 has been spotted in Section C. Proceed with extreme caution. Remember, shoot only if absolutely necessary. Sarah switched off her radio. She'd seen enough security summits to know the layout by heart. Section C, the main exhibition hall, where Rogers would be showcasing his breakthrough in contraband detection technology. In less than 3 hours, moving through the shadows, Sarah reached a service entrance. Her hands shook slightly as she swiped Martinez's borrowed maintenance key card. The door clicked open, admitting her to a maze of service corridors. The exhibition hall loomed ahead, filled with half-assembled displays and demonstration areas. Sarah's flashlight beam caught something that made her pause. Paw prints in the dust, leading toward the central stage area, but these weren't random tracks. Max was using their emergency search pattern, the one they'd developed for critical threat situations. A noise from above made her duck behind a display. Boots on the catwalk, a voice she recognized. The dog has to be eliminated before the demonstration, Rogers was saying. If he detects the compound during the showcase, it'll be handled, another voice responded. Davidson. Teams are closing in now, but Collins is still out there. If she's figured out what the dog was tracking, then she'll join him. Rogers' voice was ice. We didn't spend 3 years developing an undetectable chemical signature to have it exposed by one overachieving K9 unit. Sarah's mind raced. 3 years since the warehouse incident. They hadn't just been developing a way to hide contraband. They'd been using the K9 training program to test it, ensuring no dog could detect their compound. No dog except Max, whose enhanced abilities they'd never anticipated. A crash from the far end of the hall drew the men's attention. Sarah smiled grimly. Max was creating a diversion, just like they'd practiced countless times. Her partner was still thinking like a tactical unit, even alone. Moving quickly, Sarah reached the central stage. The demonstration area was set up with rows of identical shipping containers, the perfect way to smuggle their untraceable compound right through security. "Freeze! Hands where I can see them!" Sarah spun to find Davidson leveling his weapon at her, Rogers close behind him. "It's over, Collins. You're a good cop, but you're in way over your head." "Am I?" Sarah kept her voice steady. "Tell me something, Deputy Chief. How long have you been using our K9 training program to perfect your little side business, testing your compound on unsuspecting police dogs? Progress requires sacrifice." Rogers stepped forward. "Do you know how many millions we'll make selling this technology? Every cartel, every smuggling operation in the world will pay whatever we ask." "And Max?" Sarah's hand inched toward her weapon. "What happens to him?" "He's a failed experiment," Rogers shrugged. "Too smart for his own good, but his sacrifice will ensure no other dog develops his inconvenient abilities." A low growl rumbled through the darkness. Max emerged from behind a display, his amber eyes locked on Rogers, muscles coiled for action. Sarah felt a surge of pride. Her partner had worked his way behind them while she kept them talking. "Max, hold!" Sarah commanded, drawing her weapon in one smooth motion. "Lieutenant Davidson, I'm giving you one chance. Look at those containers. Really look at what you're protecting. Is this really what you signed up for?" Davidson's aim wavered as his flashlight beams swept across the shipping containers. In that moment of hesitation, Max moved. Years of training launched him forward, taking Davidson down with practiced precision. Sarah's weapon held Rogers in place as the sound of running feet approached, Martinez and his trusted officers right on schedule. "Sarah!" Martinez's voice boomed through the hall. "We've got the evidence. ATF is on their way. It's over." As Rogers was cuffed and led away, Max padded back to Sarah's side, pressing against her leg, just like he had on their first day of training. She knelt, wrapping her arms around his powerful neck, feeling the steady thump of his heart. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it, Max. You did it." The first light of dawn filtered through the convention center's windows as federal agents swarmed the scene. Sarah watched them catalog the evidence of a conspiracy that had nearly succeeded, and would have, if not for a dog who was too smart to fool and too loyal to quit. Max sat at attention, his posture perfect despite days on the run. Sarah pulled his spare collar from her jacket, gently fastening it around his neck. The badge caught the morning light, a symbol of trust restored. "Ready to go home, partner." Max's soft woof was all the answer she needed. Together, they walked out of the shadow of corruption and into the dawn of a new day, a reminder that sometimes the strongest bonds are built on broken rules and unshakable trust. The rising sun painted Atlanta's skyline in shades of gold as federal agents swarmed the convention center. Sarah watched them methodically catalog the evidence, shipping containers filled with the experimental compound, documentation of years of secret testing, lists of potential buyers. Each piece confirmed what Max had somehow known all along. Officer Collins, a senior ATF agent, approached, his badge catching the morning light. "We found something you should see." In a secured evidence room, the agent spread out documents across a steel table. These are the original test results from their K9 trials. They weren't just developing a way to hide contraband, they were specifically testing against enhanced detection abilities. Sarah's mind flashed back to Max's first days of training, how he'd always shown abilities beyond standard protocols. They knew some dogs might be capable of detecting their compound. Ooh, and they were systematically eliminating them from service, the agent confirmed, marking them as unsuitable for training or behaviorally unstable. Your partner wasn't just the first to detect their compound, he was the first to survive doing it. The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah as she remembered Martinez's words about Max being rejected from multiple programs. It hadn't been because he was defective, it was because he was exceptional. Later that morning, Sarah stood before the police commissioner and a room full of reporters. Max sat perfectly at attention beside her, his newly restored collar gleaming. The story had broken across all major networks. K9 officer uncovers multi-million-dollar corruption scheme. Officer Collins, the commissioner addressed her, cameras flashing. Your partner's actions have exposed a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of law enforcement across the country. How did you know to trust his judgment when everything pointed to the contrary? Sarah looked down at Max, meeting those intelligent amber eyes that had never steered her wrong. In our line of work, trust isn't just about following protocols. It's about recognizing when your partner sees something you can't. Max didn't break training that day at the airport. He elevated it to serve a higher purpose. The following week brought a special ceremony in the department's grand hall. As Sarah knelt beside Max to receive their commendations, she noticed something different in how her fellow officers regarded them. The whispers of unconventional and unpredictable had been replaced with exceptional and innovative. Deputy Chief Rogers and his conspirators faced federal charges, their scheme to compromise K9 units nationwide now exposed. But perhaps more importantly, their case had sparked a revolution in K9 training. Programs across the country began re-evaluating their standards, recognizing that sometimes the most exceptional partners were the ones who thought outside the box. 1 month later, Sarah and Max walked their familiar patrol route through Atlanta's airport. The morning sun streamed through the terminal windows, just as it had on that fateful day. A rookie officer approached them, notebook in hand. Officer Collins, they're using your case as a training example at the academy now. About trusting your partner's instincts, even when they seem to defy protocol. Sarah smiled, feeling Max's steady presence beside her. The most important protocols can't be written in any manual, she said. They're written in years of trust, in countless small moments when your partner proves they'll always have your back. Max's ears perked up suddenly, his body tensing with familiar alertness. But this time, Sarah didn't feel anxiety, only pride and absolute trust. Together, they moved toward whatever new challenge awaited, their bond stronger than ever. As they disappeared into the morning crowd, their story echoed through the halls of the Atlanta Police Department and K9 units across the country. It wasn't just a tale of one dog's extraordinary abilities or one officer's unwavering faith. It was a reminder that true partnership transcends training, that loyalty trumps protocol, and that sometimes the most heroic acts start with a simple choice to trust. The sun continued its climb over Atlanta, its light catching Max's badge as he worked. In its gleam was a promise that as long as there were partners like Sarah and Max, justice would have its guardians, corruption would find its match, and the unspoken bond between human and dog would remain one of law enforcement's most powerful weapons.